Captain Elizabeth Morgan of the Earth exploration vessel Audacity leaned back in her command chair, rubbing her temples. After 3 years traveling through space, they had finally reached their goal. The edge of what long-range scanners had found to be a busy sector of space. This would be humanity's first meeting with an advanced alien civilization. "Status report," she ordered, her voice calm despite the stress felt across the bridge. Lieutenant John Kelly, her communications officer, turned in his chair. "Captain, we're picking up an approaching vessel. It's huge, at least 30 times our size." On screen. The main view screen turned on, showing a ship that looked like someone had taken every science fiction movie from the 20th century and mashed them together. Spikes stuck out at odd angles, useless lights blinked in random patterns. The hull was painted metallic purple with gold trim. "Are they serious?" whispered Science Officer Diane White. Before anyone could respond, Lieutenant Kelly's console lit up. "Captain, we're being hailed. They're using radio waves. Very old-fashioned, but our systems can translate. Put them through." The screen changed to show the bridge of the alien vessel. A humanoid figure sat on a massive throne-like chair that sparkled with what looked like real gemstones. The alien was tall and thin with bluish skin and 6-fingered hands. It wore a cape with shoulder pads that stuck out a full meter on each side. "Attention, primitive vessel," the alien's voice boomed through the speakers. "You have entered the domain of the Galactic Hegemony, the most powerful empire to ever exist in the cosmos. I am Grand Admiral Zix Talorian of the Imperial Dreadnought. Eternal dominance. Prepare to be scanned and classified. Resistance is—" Captain Morgan couldn't help it. A snort escaped her lips, quickly followed by a stifled laugh. The alien paused, its large eyes blinking in what seemed to be confusion. "Is there a problem with your communication system, primitive?" Security Chief Frank Peterson had his fist stuffed against his mouth, shoulders shaking. Lieutenant Kelly was biting his lip so hard it had turned white. Even the usually serious, Diane was struggling to keep a straight face. "I apologize, Grand Admiral," Captain Morgan managed, fighting to keep her voice steady. "We are having some internal system issues. Please continue." The alien straightened its already rigid posture. "As I was saying, I am Grand Admiral Zix Talorian of the Imperial." This time Chief Engineer Sam Cooper lost it completely, a loud laugh escaping before he could mute his microphone. The alien's expression shifted to what humans would recognize as anger. "Do you dare mock the might of the galactic hegemony?" Elizabeth took a deep breath, knowing that diplomacy was at risk. "Grand Admiral, I assure you we mean no disrespect. We are the EEV Audacity from Earth, and we come in peace. Perhaps we could discuss matters more productively in person." The alien seemed to think about this for a moment before nodding stiffly. "Very well. Prepare to receive a delegation shuttle, and control your strange vocal spasms or you will face the consequences." As the transmission ended, the bridge of the Audacity erupted into laughter that had been held back for too long. "Oh my God," gasped Lieutenant Kelly. "Did you see those shoulder pads? And the cape?" Diane wiped tears from her eyes. "Who designed their uniforms? A theater costume department?" Captain Morgan raised her hands for quiet. "All right, everyone. Get it out of your systems now. When they arrive, I need you all to be the professional representatives of humanity that I know you can be." She paused, then added with a smile, "No matter how ridiculous their hats might be." This set off another round of laughter, but Elizabeth knew the stakes were high. First contact was too important to mess up over a case of the giggles. Even if the galactic hegemony looked like they'd stepped out of a cheap movie from the 1970s. The shuttle bay of the Audacity had been prepared for the arrival of humanity's first alien visitors. Captain Morgan stood at attention, flanked by her senior officers. They had all taken a mild sedative to suppress their laughter, a precaution suggested by Dr. Nancy Howard, the ship's chief medical officer. "Remember," Elizabeth whispered to her crew, "no matter what we see, we maintain composure. The future of human-alien relations depends on it." The alien shuttle docked with a series of unnecessary spins, turning and rotating before finally landing on the pad. Its exterior was even more fancy up close, covered in what appeared to be actual gold, with gemstones embedded along the hull. "That can't be good for flying," muttered Sam under his breath. The shuttle's door opened with a theatrical whoosh, releasing a cloud of scented smoke that smelled vaguely of cinnamon and motor oil. From within emerged 4 aliens, led by Grandi, Admiral Zix Talorian. In person, the Grand Admiral was even more imposing, and ridiculous. Standing nearly 7 feet tall, he wore a uniform with so many medals and decorations that it seemed to weigh down one side of his body. The shoulder pads were indeed enormous, and his cape dragged on the floor behind him. Atop his head sat what could only be described as a cross between a crown and an antenna. The 3 aliens behind him wore slightly less fancy versions of the same uniform, though one had what appeared to be actual living creatures attached to the shoulders of their uniform. Captain Morgan stepped forward, grateful for the sedatives in her system. "Grand Admiral Zix Talorian, welcome aboard the Earth exploration vessel Audacity. I am Captain Elizabeth Morgan, and on behalf of humanity, I extend greetings of peace and friendship." The Grand Admiral raised a 6-fingered hand dramatically. "Captain Morgan of Earth, I accept your welcome. The galactic hegemony has ruled this sector for 10,000 cycles. We have cataloged over 500 sentient species and made them part of our glorious empire." He paused, clearly waiting for an impressed reaction. Elizabeth nodded politely. "That's quite an achievement." "Indeed." The Grand Admiral gestured widely, nearly knocking one of his helpers over with his cape. "And now we shall evaluate humanity's worthiness to join as our newest client race." Frank's eye twitched slightly, but the sedatives held. "Perhaps we could show you around our vessel?" Elizabeth suggested. "We're quite proud of our technology." The Grand Admiral nodded with great dignity. "Yes, we shall inspect your primitive craftsmanship." As they led the aliens through the corridors of the Audacity, Elizabeth was very aware of the stark contrast between the 2 civilizations. Where the humans preferred clean lines, efficient design, and practical looks, everything about the aliens screamed excess and impracticality. Humanity's first contact was not what they expected, but it was certainly memorable. As they led the aliens through the corridors of the Audacity, Elizabeth noticed the stark difference between human and alien design. Where humans valued function and simplicity, the aliens seemed obsessed with show and flash. Their tour reached engineering, where Sam proudly showed the ship's fusion reactor and drive systems. "This is our main power source," he explained. "A helium-3 fusion reactor that powers our warp drive, allowing us to bend space and travel faster than light." The Grand Admiral laughed, a sound like marbles in a garbage disposal. "How quaint. You still use fusion? We abandoned such primitive technology ages ago." Sam's professional smile didn't waver. "Oh? What do you use instead?" "We harness the psychic energy of 1,000 enslaved thought beasts from the nether dimensions," the Grand Admiral stated as if discussing the weather. Sam blinked. "I'm sorry, you use..." "What?" "Thought beasts. Terrible creatures. Very dangerous. They emit pure energy when properly imprisoned and tormented." The Grand Admiral said this very casually. Elizabeth exchanged glances with her officers. Despite the sedatives, Sam looked like he was about to burst. "And is that sustainable?" Diane asked carefully. "Of course not," replied one of the other aliens, speaking for the first time. "We must conquer a new dimension every few decades to replenish our supply." "Right," Elizabeth said slowly. "Well, shall we continue the tour?" As they walked, Elizabeth noticed the aliens' strange walk, an unnecessarily complicated stride that seemed designed to make their capes flow dramatically. Behind them, they also appeared to be wearing what looked suspiciously like platform boots beneath their fancy uniform pants. The tour continued through the medical bay, where Dr. Howard explained their advanced gene therapy and nanomedicine. "Fascinating," commented the Grand Admiral, though he clearly wasn't listening. Instead, he was admiring his reflection in a polished medical cabinet. "How do you address mental problems?" "We have a variety of therapeutic approaches," Dr. Howard explained. Cognitive behavioral therapy, brain exercises, and when necessary, precisely targeted medications. The Grand Admiral scoffed. We simply replace the heads of those who display mental deficiencies. There was a moment of stunned silence. Replace their heads? Dr. Howard asked faintly. Yes, with cloned versions of the original, but without the defect. It's quite effective, though the death rate is nearly 90%. The Grand Admiral stated this with pride. Dr. Howard's sedative was clearly wearing off. As her eye began to twitch violently, Elizabeth quickly intervened. Perhaps we should move on to the recreation area. As the tour continued, it became increasingly clear that the galactic hegemony, for all its supposed advancement and grandeur, was a civilization built on appearances rather than substance. Their technology was flashy but inefficient. Their social structure was oppressive and counterproductive, and their understanding of basic physics seemed questionable at best. By the time they reached the ship's mess hall, Elizabeth had developed a splitting headache, and the sedatives were definitely wearing off. And here is where our crew takes their meals, she explained. The Grand Admiral looked around with obvious disdain. You mean your servants don't feed you by hand while you recline on floating couches? John Kelly, who had maintained good composure until now, finally broke. A snicker escaped him, quickly followed by a hastily disguised cough. The Grand Admiral's eyes narrowed. Are you experiencing those strange vocal spasms again, human? Elizabeth stepped in quickly. Grand Admiral, perhaps we should discuss the possibility of a formal relationship between our peoples. What exactly would membership in your hegemony mean for humanity? The Grand Admiral seemed pleased by the question. It is quite simple. You would give up 90% of your resources as tribute, provide soldiers for our glorious army, and of course send your most attractive specimens to serve in the Imperial pleasure gardens. This time, it wasn't just John who reacted. The entire human delegation stared in disbelief. And what would we get in return? Elizabeth asked carefully. The Grand Admiral looked genuinely confused by the question. Why, the honor of being part of the galactic hegemony, of course. What more could any species desire? Frank Peterson, whose sedative had clearly worn off, entirely, couldn't contain himself any longer. He burst into laughter so intense that he had to lean against the wall for support. The Grand Admiral's face contorted with rage. You dare mock the generosity of the hegemony? Elizabeth knew the diplomatic mission was rapidly falling apart, but found herself struggling to care. These aliens, for all their bluster and pageantry, were offering humanity nothing but exploitation, wrapped in ridiculous packaging. Grand Admiral, she said, no longer bothering to hide her smile, I think there's been a misunderstanding about the nature of our potential relationship. Back in the Audacity's conference room, Captain Morgan faced a difficult diplomatic situation. On one side of the table sat her senior staff, most still fighting to control their expressions. On the other side, Grand Admiral Zix Tellurian and his delegation sat rigidly, clearly offended by the humans' barely concealed amusement. Let me be direct, Grand Admiral. Elizabeth began, deciding that honesty might be the best approach. The terms you've outlined for humanity's inclusion in your hegemony are unacceptable. We're not interested in becoming an exploited client. Race. The Grand Admiral's face darkened to a deeper shade of blue. You dare reject the benevolence of the galactic hegemony? Countless civilizations would sacrifice their young for the opportunity we offer you. Sam Cooper couldn't help himself. Younglings? Really? The Grand Admiral stood abruptly, his cape swishing dramatically. This insolence will not stand. The hegemony has ruled this sector for 10,000 cycles through strength and fear. If you will not join willingly, you will be conquered. Rather than the fear or panic the aliens clearly expected, the humans exchanged glances that contained more concern about maintaining composure than about the actual threat. Grand Admiral, Elizabeth said calmly, I strongly advise against any hostile action. We came in peace, but humanity is well prepared to defend itself. Your primitive technology is no match for our might. The Grand Admiral gestured to one of his subordinates. Show them an example of our power. The alien officer activated a holographic display showing what appeared to be a battleship of the hegemony firing upon an asteroid. The weapon's beam was certainly impressive, creating a large explosion. However, both Diane and Sam narrowed their eyes at the display. "That's odd," Diane said, leaning forward. "The energy pattern doesn't match the explosion size, and the asteroid's composition would require at least 3 times that energy to break apart in that manner," Sam added. The Grand Admiral shifted uncomfortably. "Our weapons are beyond your understanding. Or perhaps," Elizabeth suggested gently, "they're not quite as powerful as you're presenting them to be." The tension in the room shifted subtly. The Grand Admiral's bluster seemed to deflate slightly, and one of his subordinates looked distinctly nervous. Elizabeth decided to press the advantage. "Lieutenant Kelly, please display our defensive capabilities." John tapped a few commands, bringing up schematics of Earth's defense grid and the Audacity's weapon systems. Nothing secret, but enough to demonstrate that humanity wasn't helpless. "Our ship alone carries 19 tactical nuclear missiles, each with a yield of 50 megatons," Elizabeth explained. "Our point defense lasers can track and eliminate targets, the size of a coin at a distance of 10,000 kilometers. And this is just one exploration vessel, not even a dedicated warship." The aliens were silent, studying the displays with growing unease. "Additionally," Frank added, clearly enjoying himself now, "our ship's AI can calculate firing solutions for all weapons simultaneously while predicting evasive maneuvers with 99.7% accuracy." The Grand Admiral's eyes darted between his subordinates. These could be lies. Primitive species often exaggerate their capabilities. "You're welcome to scan our ship to verify," Elizabeth offered generously. "Though I should warn you, our cybersecurity protocols are quite robust. The last system that attempted an unauthorized scan of our databases experienced difficulties." This wasn't exactly true, but the bluff had its intended effect. The aliens huddled together, speaking in hushed tones. Finally, the Grand Admiral turned back to the humans. "Perhaps we have been hasty in our judgment of your species. The hegemony values strength, and you have shown unexpected qualities." Elizabeth nodded graciously. "We appreciate your reconsideration. Perhaps we could discuss a more equal relationship between our civilizations, one based on mutual respect and exchange rather than domination." The Grand Admiral looked physically pained by the suggestion, but managed a stiff nod. "Such arrangements are not unprecedented." As negotiations continued, a pattern emerged that amused the humans to no end. For all their bluster and dramatic presentations, the galactic hegemony was, in reality, a paper tiger. Their technology, while flashy, was often less advanced than humanity's. Their vast empire consisted largely of planets they had intimidated, rather than actually conquered, and their military might, when pressed for specifics, was considerably less impressive than initially presented. By the end of the day, the dynamic had shifted completely. What had begun as the Grand Admiral dictating terms had transformed into something closer to the humans humoring the aliens' need to save face. "So," Elizabeth summarized, "we agree to a non-aggression pact, limited cultural exchange, and potential future trade negotiations to be conducted on neutral ground." "Yes," the Grand Admiral said, clearly trying to maintain some semblance of dignity. "The hegemony accepts these terms, for now." As the alien delegation prepared to depart, Elizabeth escorted them back to their shuttle. The Grand Admiral paused before boarding. "Captain Morgan," he said stiffly, "your species is unlike any we have encountered before. You show no proper fear or reverence." Elizabeth smiled diplomatically. "Grand Admiral, humanity has a long history of questioning authority and challenging those who rely on intimidation rather than genuine strength. We've found it serves us well." The Grand Admiral's expression was unreadable. "The hegemony will be watching your species with great interest." As the shuttle departed with another unnecessarily elaborate series of maneuvers, Elizabeth rejoined her senior staff. "Well," she said, "that was educational." "Do you think there'll be trouble?" Frank asked, still grinning. Elizabeth shook her Ed. I think they'll be very careful around us from now on. Nothing scares a bully more than someone who laughs at their threats. Can you imagine? Sam said, wiping tears of laughter from his eyes. Enslaved thought beasts from the nether dimensions? They're either the worst liars in the galaxy or completely delusional. Perhaps both, Diane suggested. Their entire society seems built on appearances and intimidation. Elizabeth nodded thoughtfully. Send a message to Earth. Let them know we've made first contact and it's not what we expected. Also, recommend that any future human vessels in this sector be briefed on the hegemony's peculiarities. And maybe stock up on sedatives, Dr. Howard added with a smile. 2 weeks after the initial contact with the galactic hegemony, the Audacity was continuing its mission, charting star systems at the edge of what they now knew was called the glorious central domain of the hegemony. Captain Morgan was reviewing survey data when Lieutenant Kelly's console lit up. Captain, he called, we're receiving a transmission. It's from, well, it appears to be from the hegemony, but it's not coming from an official channel. Elizabeth frowned. Put it through to my ready room. Once alone, she activated the screen, to find herself facing not the Grand Admiral, but one of his subordinates, the nervous-looking one who had seemed most uncomfortable during the negotiations. Captain Morgan, the alien said in a hushed voice, glancing over his shoulder. I am Subcommander Nix Valerian. I must speak with you urgently and in private. I'm listening, Subcommander. The alien leaned closer to the camera. The Grand Admiral has been removed. The Imperial Council was most displeased with his handling of first contact with your species. Elizabeth raised an eyebrow. I'm sorry to hear that. Is there a new diplomatic representative we should be talking with? That's not why I'm contacting you, Nick said, lowering his voice further. The truth is, the hegemony is in crisis. Your encounter exposed weaknesses that have been building for centuries. Now Elizabeth was genuinely intrigued. Go on. The galactic hegemony is not what it appears to be, Nix confessed. Once, thousands of cycles ago, we were indeed a powerful empire, but over time we became complacent. Our technological development stagnated. We began to focus more on appearance than substance. That does explain a few things, Elizabeth commented dryly. For generations, we've maintained control through elaborate deception, Nix continued. Our weapons are largely for show. Our enslaved thought beasts are a myth. Even our supposed client races are mostly uninhabited planets we claim to have conquered. Elizabeth struggled to maintain a neutral expression. And you're telling me this because your ship's sensors likely already detected these truths, and because there is a faction within the hegemony pushing for war with humanity. A war we cannot win, but which could cost many lives on both sides. Elizabeth's amusement faded. I appreciate your honesty, Sub-Commander. What exactly are you proposing? I represent a growing movement within our society that seeks reform. We wish to rebuild the hegemony as a true interstellar nation, not the hollow facade it has become. But the old guard is resistant. And you think humanity can help somehow? Nix nodded. Your arrival has created the perfect opportunity for change. Already, many are questioning the leadership that has kept us trapped in this cycle of deception and stagnation. Before she could respond, alarms blared throughout the ship. Elizabeth quickly returned to the bridge. Report, she ordered. Captain, 3 hegemony vessels have just dropped out of FTL, Frank announced. They're taking up position around us. On screen, the view screen showed 3 ships similar to the one they'd encountered before, though not quite as large or elaborate. They're hailing us, John reported. Put them through. The screen changed to show an alien wearing an even more ostentatious uniform than the Grand Admiral's, if such a thing were possible. This one had what appeared to be live flame somehow incorporated into the shoulder pads. Attention Earth vessel, the alien announced. I am Supreme War Master Krasviridian of the Imperial Enforcement Fleet. By decree of the Imperial Council, you are hereby ordered to surrender your vessel for inspection and your crew for questioning regarding suspected espionage against the galactic hegemony. Elizabeth maintained her composure. Supreme War Master, we have a non-aggression agreement with the hegemony. On what grounds are you making these accusations? We have detected unauthorized communications between your vessel and treasonous elements within the hegemony, the War Master declared. You will comply immediately or face the consequences. Elizabeth glanced at Diane, who subtly shook her head. Their sensors showed the hegemony ships had activated weapon systems, but they appeared to be running at minimum power, likely for show. Supreme War Master, Elizabeth said calmly, I must decline your request. Our agreement was made in good faith and we have not violated its terms. The War Master's expression darkened. Then you leave us no choice. He made a dramatic gesture, and the transmission ended. Battle stations, Elizabeth ordered, but no offensive actions unless I give the command. The crew moved with practiced efficiency, activating the Audacity's defense systems. They're charging weapons, Frank reported, then paused. At least, that's what they want us to think. There's a lot of energy being routed to external emitters, but the actual weapon capacitors are barely active. They're bluffing, Sam confirmed from his engineering station. Classic case of all show, no substance. Elizabeth nodded. Let's not call their bluff too aggressively. Diane, can you configure our shields to put on a good light show when they hit us, without actually engaging our main defensive grid? Diane smiled. Absolutely, Captain. I can make it look like we're taking a beating while barely using any power. Perfect. Let's give them the surrender they want, just not the one they're expecting. The hegemony ships fired, their beams flashing dramatically across space. When they struck the Audacity, Diane's modified shields flickered impressively, creating the illusion of significant impact. Oh no. Elizabeth deadpanned into the open communication channel. Your weapons are too powerful. We cannot withstand such an assault. John Kelly had to turn away to hide his grin. After allowing the battle to continue for a few minutes, Elizabeth signaled for hailing frequencies to be opened. Supreme War Master, she said, injecting a note of defeat into her voice. Your forces are clearly superior. We will agree to negotiations to prevent further damage to our vessel. The War Master appeared on screen, barely containing his smugness. A wise decision, Captain. Prepare to receive a boarding party. Once the transmission ended, Elizabeth turned to her crew. All right, let's receive our conquerors appropriately. Frank, I want a security team in the shuttle bay, but keep weapons holstered. John, make sure our little conversation with Sub-Commander Nix is thoroughly scrubbed from the systems. Sam, prepare a little demonstration of our actual capabilities, just in case our guests need convincing. The boarding party from the hegemony was even more ridiculous in person than Elizabeth had anticipated. Led by Supreme War Master Krasveridian himself, the aliens strutted into the shuttle bay with exaggerated military precision, each step clearly choreographed for maximum dramatic effect. The War Master's flaming shoulder pads required 2 subordinates to carry fire suppression equipment just in case. Captain Morgan, the War Master announced, his voice echoing unnecessarily through the bay. Your vessel is now under the control of the Galactic Hegemony. You will submit to questioning regarding your communications with treasonous elements. Elizabeth stepped forward, giving a performance worthy of a theater stage. Supreme War Master, we acknowledge your overwhelming military superiority. However, before we proceed, perhaps we could discuss this matter more privately. The War Master seemed pleased by her apparent submission. Very well. Lead me to your command center. Instead, Elizabeth led him and a small contingent of his officers to the ship's conference room where Sam, Diane, John, and Frank were waiting. The rest of the boarding party was left in the shuttle bay under the watchful eye of security. Once the doors closed, Elizabeth's demeanor changed completely. Now then, Supreme War Master, let's be honest with each other. The alien blinked in confusion. What trickery is this? You surrendered. Did I? Elizabeth smiled. I agreed to negotiations, and now we're negotiating. She nodded to Sam, who activated a holographic display showing a detailed scan of the hegemony vessels. Your ships are impressive to look at, Elizabeth said casually. But our scans show your weapon systems are operating at less than 15% of their supposed capacity. Your shields are mostly projection and light effects with minimal actual defensive capabilities, and your life support systems are struggling to maintain basic functionality while you're diverting power to maintain the illusion of strength. The War Master's face had turned a pale, sickly blue. His subordinates looked at each other in barely concealed panic. Furthermore, Elizabeth continued, we've detected at least 6 different factions sending communications within your fleet, suggesting your command structure is fragmented at best. Oh, and those aren't actually flames on your shoulder pads, they're holographic projections with heating elements to create the illusion of fire. Clever, but inefficient. This is outrageous, the War Master sputtered. No, Elizabeth countered. What's outrageous is that you've built an entire civilization on appearances rather than substance. You've sacrificed functional technology for theatrical effects. You've replaced actual governance with elaborate costumes and titles. One of the War Master's subordinates, a younger alien with fewer decorations, suddenly snorted with laughter, quickly trying to disguise it as a cough. The War Master turned on him furiously. Officer Tix Malorian, control yourself. I'm sorry, Supreme War Master, the young officer said, not looking sorry at all. But the human speaks truth that many of us have known for generations. Elizabeth exchanged glances with her crew. This was an unexpected development. The truth, Elizabeth said more gently, is that humanity doesn't want conflict with the hegemony. We don't want to expose your weaknesses to others who might exploit them. What we want is honest, mutually beneficial relations. The War Master seemed to deflate, his elaborate uniform suddenly looking merely silly rather than imposing. You don't understand, he said quietly. The deception is all we have left. If the client races discovered the truth, then what? The young officer Tix challenged. They would leave? Most of them already know and simply play along because it benefits them too. And the Imperial Council, the War Master began, is composed of old fools who haven't had an original thought in centuries, Tix interrupted. They've been recycling the same speeches for generations while our actual infrastructure crumbles. The conference room had become the stage for what was clearly a long-simmering internal conflict within the hegemony. Elizabeth caught Frank's eye and subtly signaled him to be ready for anything. Perhaps, she suggested, this is an opportunity. Not for conquest or surrender, but for transformation. All eyes turned to her. Humanity hasn't always been united or wise, she explained. Our history is full of empires that rose and fell, leaders who valued style over substance, civilizations that stagnated because they refused to adapt. But we learned gradually that true strength comes from innovation, cooperation, and honesty, not from intimidation and deception. The room was silent as the aliens absorbed her words. Sub-Commander Nix contacted me because he sees the same truth, Elizabeth continued. There are those within your society who want change, who understand that the hegemony can't continue as it has been. The War Master looked stunned. You've spoken with Nix Valerian? He reached out to us, Elizabeth confirmed. And I suspect he's not alone. To everyone's surprise, Tix stepped forward. He's not. Many of us, especially the younger generations, want to rebuild the hegemony as something real, not this theatrical farce it has become. The War Master looked between his subordinate and the humans, clearly struggling with a lifetime of conditioning versus the reality before him. Finally, he removed his elaborate headdress, a gesture that seemed deeply significant to the other aliens who gasped audibly. When I was young, the War Master said quietly, I believed in the greatness of the hegemony. I memorized the histories, practiced the grand speeches, endured the painful modifications to fit the uniform standards. But each cycle, the gap between what we claim to be and what we are grows wider. He looked at Elizabeth with new respect. Perhaps the arrival of humans in our sector is not a threat, but an opportunity, as you say. Over the next several hours, a remarkable negotiation unfolded. Not between enemies, but between potential allies who might help each other overcome their respective limitations. The humans offered technical expertise and fresh perspectives. The reformists within the hegemony offered knowledge of the sector and cultural insights that would be invaluable for humanity's continued exploration. By the time the boarding party returned to their vessels, a new agreement had been reached, one far more substantial than the first. The hegemony would begin a gradual process of reform with humanity's discreet assistance. In return, Earth would gain valuable allies in what had turned out to be a much more complex galactic community than they had initially realized. As the hegemony ships departed, with considerably less theatrical flourish than when they arrived, Elizabeth gathered her senior staff. "Well," she said, "that wasn't exactly how first contact scenarios are covered in the training manuals." "No," Diane agreed with a smile, "but I think I prefer how it turned out. Can you imagine if they had actually been as powerful as they pretended to be? We might be facing a genuine threat instead of helping to reform a declining empire." "The question is," Frank said thoughtfully, "how do we explain this to Earth? Dear Admiralty, we've made first contact with an alien civilization that looks like they raided the costume department of a sci-fi B-movie and has built an entire society on elaborate bluffing." "Actually," John suggested, "we tell them exactly that. But we also explain that beneath the ridiculous exterior is a civilization with genuine potential. They just got lost along the way." Elizabeth nodded. "And we tell them that humanity has an opportunity to help shape the future of this sector of space, not through conquest or domination, but through partnership and honest exchange." "It's going to be an interesting diplomatic challenge," Sam mused, "helping them maintain enough of their traditions and image to save face, while encouraging real progress." "Speaking of challenges," Dr. Howard interjected, "what about the War Master's revelation about other factions within the hegemony? Not everyone will welcome these reforms." Elizabeth's expression grew more serious. "That's true. The old guard won't give up power easily, but I think our new friends understand that better than anyone." Later that evening, as Elizabeth was preparing her official report, her communication console chimed. It was Nix and Tix, now openly appearing together. "Captain Morgan," Nix began, his manner far less nervous than before, "we wanted to thank you personally. Today marks the beginning of a new era for the hegemony. We've already begun discreetly reaching out to other reform-minded officials," Tix added. "The response has been overwhelming. Many have been waiting for just such a catalyst." "I'm glad to hear it," Elizabeth replied. "But remember, true change takes time. Don't try to transform everything overnight." "We understand," Nix assured her. "Generations of deception can't be undone in a day. But for the first time in living memory, we're having honest conversations about our future. And about our past," Tix added. "Our archives contain records from the early days of the hegemony, when we were explorers and builders rather than pretenders. Those ideals still resonate." Elizabeth smiled. "Every civilization faces crossroads in its development, moments when it must choose between clinging to comfortable illusions or embracing difficult truths. Humanity has faced similar challenges. Yet you overcame them," Nix observed. "Not always gracefully," Elizabeth admitted. "We've had our share of Grand Admirals and Supreme War Masters throughout our history. Leaders who valued appearance over substance, who built power through fear rather than respect. How did you move beyond such leadership?" Tix asked earnestly. Elizabeth considered the question. "Gradually, and with many setbacks, but ultimately through the same qualities I see in both of you: courage to question, willingness to change, and the ability to laugh at ourselves when necessary." After the communication ended, Elizabeth finished her report to Earth Command. She concluded with a personal observation. "In our quest to find advanced alien civilizations, we perhaps expected too much, either godlike beings of vastly superior technology or monstrous conquerors bent on our destruction. Instead, we found something far more familiar: people struggling with the weight of their own history, trying to balance tradition with progress, appearance with substance. In the galactic hegemony, Humanity hasn't found the awe-inspiring aliens of our dreams or the terrifying enemies of our nightmares. We've found, for better or worse, a reflection of ourselves, just with sillier hats. Respectfully submitted, Captain Elizabeth Morgan, Earth Exploration Vessel Audacity. As she sent the report, Elizabeth couldn't help but smile at the thought of the Admiral's faces when they read it. First contact had not gone according to any of the scenarios they had trained for. It had been absurd, comical, and at times downright ridiculous. But in the end, perhaps that was more valuable than any textbook encounter could have been. After all, what better way to enter the galactic stage than with a reminder that even across the vast distances of space, people were still just people, with all their flaws, foibles, and penchant for really impractical shoulder pads. And if there was one thing humanity had learned throughout its tumultuous history, it was that you could accomplish a lot more with a well-timed laugh than with a well-armed fleet.